Okay, welcome everyone to the February 18th, 2020 meeting of the East Bridgewater Finance Committee. So we'll call the meeting to order at 6:30. All right, and our main topic of discussion, as per usual, is the budget. We have two guests joining us tonight. We have Mrs. Nelson, who is joining us from the Historic Commission, and then in 15 minutes, Peter Fury will be joining us from the Recreation Commission, both which wish to speak with the committee regarding budget. So, Mrs. Nelson, if you want to, oh, we didn't pull a chair up for you.
Yeah, there's one right here, nice one.
I brought you more paper.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We
should get the ones with the legs cut off.
You over there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Nelson.
Oh, I got two.
Oops, you got two, okay.
Thank you.
We can throw one down for Brian.
Thank you.
There we go. Okay.
Nice logo.
We've been receiving for the last few years $1,859. And we've been trying to do the best we can with it to get some things done around town. Needless to say, it doesn't go too far. At one point, we were getting $2,000. Somewhere along the line, we got reduced down. So we'd like to bring it back up. Hopefully, wishful thinking maybe, if we could get it to 25. We'd also like to add in something for some projects this year. Now, what I gave you as a handout includes a map on the second page. And it's a map of the cemetery that you see when you look right out this window. Old part, the old graveyard, which is a town property. And back in 1999, we had a state-funded study done on what should be done to preserve it, enhance it, keep it from literally disappearing off the face of the common district. And the biggest thing, which I've highlighted in green, we've got 4 huge pine trees. Now, we've always got, because of the weather and what have you, broken stones in old graveyards, and tipped stones and sunken stones, and there's no sense in replacing a bunch of, or repairing, I'm sorry, not replacing, repairing a bunch of stones and then having 4 big pine trees come down in the next really good storm. We've talked to John Haynes about this. John would love to see them gone. He hasn't got the equipment to do it. It needs a crane, in part because you can't just cut them and lay them down because there's no direction you can lay them down in. They're too big. It's pricey. John said, he said, I can't put a number on it for you. See what you can get for money. Maybe we can take down 2, maybe we can take down 3, maybe we can get all 4 down. But before we go too far, that's what needs to be done. Now, we have done some work over there with our limited funds and a lot of cooperation from John Haynes and his wonderful department. We've got the old rusted flagpole out of there. We've worked on the Whitman plot, which has 4 lovely granite posts, and hopefully within a few weeks we'll have the chains replaced there. We had a gentleman by the name of Frank Drollett, who's been doing restoration work down at the ancient cemetery in Plymouth. Professional, well-known, expert, and he has repositioned the stones that are in there, cleaned them in the proper function and manner for the old stones. You can't just go in there with a scrub brush as much as we'd like to. It's a tricky thing to do. But before he goes any further and before we put out any more money, we really need to get those trees out of there. We've replaced the pedestrian gate. We've got some signs up. We've cleaned in the back a little bit. We've looked and talked and thought, and now we're down to the point where we need some more money. So we'd like to add, in addition to getting $2,500 as our operating budget, if we could get another $2,500 as a project budget. That would get us pointed in the right direction at least. There are some things on this that we aren't even considering doing, such as repaving the road that goes in there between us and Central Cemetery and replacing the gate that used to be on that roadway. But there's definitely a lot of work that can be done in there. There are stones that are laying flat on the ground in pieces. it needs care. It's the second oldest cemetery in the area. I mean, people started living, I shouldn't say people started living here. The indigenous peoples were here before. But we started with European settlers here in 1650. And the first minister in the East Parish is buried in this burial ground. The gentleman whose grave site we're working on and replacing the chains and the posts and all of that is a Revolutionary War veteran. And he's not the only one who's buried in there. It's very historic, very interesting, and very much in need of help. So I'm here to plea for money.
Okay. Any initial questions?
Are the trees your first focus?
Yes.
Or- okay.
Getting those 4 big pine trees has to be our first big focus because, in fact, one of them lost a good-sized branch this past week. Fortunately, and John Haynes says it's spooky how often this happened, it missed everything, but it was a branch. It was, I mean, the trunks are,
Right,
you know, you can't get your arms around them.
right.
There's a lot of trees in there, and the state was interested in taking down quite a few of them. But those pine trees are the things that we've really got to get out of there. They're a shallow-rooted tree. They're usually the first thing that goes over if the wind is really blowing.
Do the most damage.
And do the most damage.
Is your main focus the cemetery? Is that where most of your 1859 would go in a given year?
Yes. For project-wise. I mean, we do need office supplies. We're doing some other things. We've funded in the past some Eagle Scout projects. There was a boy that did a nice cleanup down at Sachem Rock and put up some signage and what have you. What was the other one? There was another one that was cleaning some of the other stones in town, the stone markers, which we're still looking for a few of them. We're not quite sure of locations. Our records are a little hazy on a few things, and we're working on straightening that part out too. Restoration in the library, we funded the digitization of some of the old town reports that were there. I think they've got that up online. I know it's coming if it isn't. So we're trying to, you know, we're charged with identifying and preserving the historic assets of the town of East Bridgewater. And, you know, it's an all-volunteer army, as you guys well understand. We're doing what we
I have
can.
a question. Did
Yes.
you talk to Doobie, one of the tree guys in town, about how much this is actually gonna cost?
We've talked to John Haynes, who said that if we could get some money, he'd then do the talking for us. He knows what, you know, what they could do. If the guy comes in with a crane and takes out this, you know, he can take care of parts of it and what have you, but.
Right, but I mean, I had the same thing happen in my backyard, and it was $1,800 to move one tree. So if we give you $1,800, you're gonna get 4? Is that what you're saying?
So are
No.
you thinking, like, should we be, at this point, and again, not necessarily our purview, but if you're looking at project-based work, should we be looking at what it would take to take the trees down?
Well, just, yeah, how much is it gonna cost, right? I mean, I think that's reasonable.
Pretty much what John said was, you get some money and we'll take down what you can, what we can get down.
All right, we'll give you $50.
Won't get us that.
I wanna
Yeah,
let's
no,
do the job right.
we
you know,
realize
and
it needs-
understand, you
Yeah,
know, if
we
it's
realize
$10,000,
it
let's
needs
not
to
give
be
you
in the
1,000.
thousands. I've had them taken down in my yard too, and I
Yeah.
know $1,000 doesn't go very far.
Yeah.
But if
One
we get
tree.
2,500 as our line item and 2,500 as our budget item, we can
Right.
kind of combine and see where we can get to. But we know it's going to probably be a phased
Yep.
thing. And the other thing would be, there might be some private sources we could tap or something like this, that once we've got a number that we know we've got, then we can talk about who can we get and what can we get done through John. And then if we need to try to get some private money into it, we've got a basis to work from. We went and looked at state grants, and that just wasn't gonna fly. The minimum they were giving out was a $5,000 grant. soon as we said we were working on a cemetery, they said, okay, you're gonna need your $5,000 that the state will match. You're gonna need another $2,500 that you'll be just needing temporarily for making your payroll and your supplies and what have you, and the time frame. And, oh, by the way, then because you're working on a cemetery and it's a state grant, you're gonna need to hire a landscape architect who specializes in archaeology. And that can't be funded by the grant.
And it can't be cheap.
It can't be cheap.
Yeah.
So, and when we said, well, then we're not even gonna apply, they said, oh, just use your CPA money, it'll be no problem. No comment.
Yeah.
They didn't believe that we really were looking for a grant, and we didn't have that, but, you know, we didn't know, we went and talked, it was a workshop, and, you know, but, I appreciate what you're saying about, you know, which comes first, do you get the price or do you get the money? And since we've been working with that $1,859, we figured we'd see what we could get
Yeah.
for money and
What
kind of
other,
go from there.
what else, other than the cemetery, is in the future, in the horizon for the commission? What other projects would you be thinking about working on?
We do need to work on the historical markers around town. We've got one that's tipped over from an accident. We've got another one that's got run over and kind of buried. It was a rock by the side of it. We need to get like cement bases and things like that and get it a little more permanently installed than what some of it is. There's a lot of things that could be done with Sachem Rock. We would love to see that more accessible, more publicized. Those are probably the two biggest things. We are supposed to be identifying older houses, which there's a whole publication that's up at the library of older houses, but by no means is it all of them. There's still more things we need to do with that.
So any of the older houses in the town, are you, do you do like plaques or anything like that that identifies them?
We have done it in the past. They did it to the Sesquicentennial. And that's something we've been trying to get organized and get back into doing, and we just haven't got it off the ground yet.
So some houses do have the
they?
historic
Yeah.
plaques
Some
on
of
them.
them still do have the plaques
Yeah,
on them.
Eastman's house, I know, has one. I drive by it every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a lot we could do.
Sure.
Time is,
It's the Gladys Farron House.
Gladys Farron House is another long haul story that we're not gonna win. Hopefully, somebody will come along and say, I'll give you $1 and move it. That's about the best we're gonna hope for. It's part of our,
Behind the garage.
it's part of our historic district. It's owned by the town. George Washington didn't sleep there. I wish he had. Yeah, it's in a bad place. It's been moved. Parts of it are definitely a little questionable as to if they'd survive moving.
Yeah.
If we could get the historical society in town as, you know, a private entity, could do something with it, move it, take it, what have you, that would be wonderful. But
Yeah.
it's been talked and
It's an
talked
uphill-
and talked
it's an
and
uphill fight, I
talked,
think, yeah.
and it just isn't anything that seems to be viable.
Yeah. What about the town's anniversary coming up?
Hopefully, there will be some kind of a committee formed to do that. As a commission, we're not supposed to be running parades or celebrations or anything like that. That's
Okay.
not supposed to be our purview. We could happily join a committee that was being formed and, you know, be part of that, but it's not something that comes under our mandate.
What's your, other than concerned citizen, what's your background that leads you into this?
History major in college.
Yeah.
I'm involved with one of the lineage societies down in Plymouth, the Howland Society. A family that comes from the Cape and from Maine that have been here since some of the
Forever.
Pilgrims.
Yeah, okay.
And just an interest in
I commend you for that.
history. Any other questions or things I could address for you concerning this?
Anything else from you guys? No? No? Great. Wonderful. Well, we'll absolutely take it into consideration when we're putting through the rest of our season here.
I thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Brian, do you have an extra copy that I
do.
can take to scan for the other members? Sure. That I didn't write. Notes on. Great, thank you. When we get closer, we'll start doing the line items in a couple weeks. Yeah,
Pennies on the dollar.
yeah. So what we'll do is we'll run through the whole thing, and we'll kind of grill it all at that point, yeah. Yeah.
Get the quote and do it all.
I got
10
questions.
grand, and give it 10 grand. Take care of this
We
trust.
have to see the big picture first. but-
Well, I mean, how does this affect the big picture, I guess is what I'm
Yeah.
I
saying.
didn't know that, Pat, she didn't mention that.
I know.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, next we have
Yeah.
Mr. Fioria from the Recreation Commission.
I
Come
mean,
on down.
Just do it right. Just 10 grand and get the
It says the
tree.
price is right, literally.
Yeah, get rid of it.
Spin the wheel, see where it lands.
See where your luck is, no.
Thank you for having me tonight. My name is Peter Fury. I'm Chair of the Recreation Commission. I wanted to come over here tonight and hopefully establish or reestablish a working relationship, so we can maybe try to find a way to promote the town from within, have people actively involved and engaged in the community, make for a better town for all the townspeople and so forth. A little bit about the Recreation Commission. We just brought on a new board member. I think we're 7 right now.
Any chance you can rattle off the names, because I didn't have a chance to look them up.
Sure. It's Bob Catellis, John Shea, Tom Williams, Teresa McNulty, Jessica Packer, Joe Fleck, myself.
Thank you. Perfect, thank you.
I'll be impressed if you really just
Got
got
all
all
of that on the
those.
first pass?
I got 3.5.
Well, I know all the names, so.
Probably.
I knew them, that's why it was easier.
Give them to me again.
I might be able.
I think we can pull it off I think it must be on the website, too.
Okay, can I just ask like a new guy question? So what's the difference between a commission and a department? Like, when I grew up, there's a recreation department in the town. Like, you know, all
Commission
those-
would oversee the department.
Commission oversees the department,
Yep.
okay. Like, so is it like a police commission that oversees the?
Sort of, yeah.
the police
That's a very good
department?
analogy.
Okay, gotcha. All right, just so I,
So right now, we're a commission that doesn't oversee too much, to be truthfully frank and honest. We're charged or tasked with a great deal of things, oversight of town lands, fields, and so forth, and then betterment of the community and so forth. I've been on the commission for approximately 3 years. There's been a lot of turnover in those 3 years. Hence the reason I'm the chair. We've gone through time.
Feel your pain.
I know.
Yeah.
I just didn't step back. You know the analogy.
Yeah.
So we've been tasked with we've been challenged, secretary in and out, treasurer in and out, board members in and out. But I feel really excited and good about the fact that I think we have a good nucleus and a group of like-minded individuals, and we've got we're generating a good culture and some activity to kind of move the commission forward, if that's so deemed by, obviously, the town and so forth. And I think what we'd like to see is there's lots of different entities within the community, and I think tying them all together seems to be one of our biggest challenges as a community, and this could be the landing spot for that, just given the nature and the structure and kind of the go-forward approach that the Recreation Commission kind of has adopted recently. So it's exciting for us to kind of come together as a group and try to march forward and hopefully for the benefit of the community and so forth. Some of the challenges that we have with that, funding obviously being one of them. I think our budget is $500 a year. Tough to do much of anything with $500 a year.
Sure.
But we have a lot of people who have been incredibly dedicated, and so some of the funds that we bring in come through user fees through the fields and so forth, like soccer fields up at Belmont Street, or the one maybe down at Church Street, the baseball field, Strong's Field. A lot of these things, new guy, I don't know if it's just to the board or to the town in general. Some of these things
Board.
people don't even know about. They've been, people have been in the town for many years and have had no idea that Strong's Field is right around the corner, and it's a beautiful facility. We're trying to improve upon it. It's somebody who's very dedicated to that facility and who's done a world of difference in kind of making that, just a great example of what I believe East Bridgewater should be. So I think what we're trying to do is try to establish some relationships with some of the other town departments and so forth, and see what we can do about trying to go forward. I think that there's a lot of synergies within the organizations, whether it be youth sports or arts or parade committee. I don't know if if funding isn't available, if things like parade committee will continue, Christmas, the Christmas parade. So I think what we're trying to do is just get a group of people together and see how we can go forward. That's why I'm here tonight.
You guys have a website?
We do. Yep, we do.
Is it like through the town?
It is.
Oh, okay,
Yep.
so I'll go check it out. Okay, cool.
Yep.
I didn't know that.
Not much of one, but we got one.
You sounded
Start,
surprised when
right?
you're like, me
To start.
too.
Yep.
So we've had like some initial conversations because it's come up in other budget presentations when we start talking about, DPW is a perfect example, when we start talking about field maintenance and all of this, and we start peppering some of those other folks with questions that probably ultimately needed to come back to you guys anyway. So when thinking about obviously committee of volunteers, so I can fully appreciate
Sure.
it. When we start talking about things like revenue opportunities, so you've got your 3 major fields that you've got potential revenue coming in through, and then obviously expenses, which are probably the majority maintenance type expenses and betterments, improvements, that type of thing. Who is ultimately kind of managing your agreements, your scheduling, your finances, to make sure that we're constantly looking at, are we capturing all the revenue we can? Who's looking at the service agreements,
Sure,
opportunities?
I think that's a great question, and I think that's the basis of part of the new energy for what we're trying to enact. We, right, wrong, or indifferent, whether it be baseball or soccer, they're the ones who are tasked or charged with making sure that they're collecting on fees from out of town, that the insurances are correct, and so forth. So largely that's based on volunteers within those youth organizations. And I think part of the other thing that is the reason why I think we need to think a little bit bigger about how we're currently doing things is that I think volunteerism is going to continue to be challenged going forward. So I think some of the big investments that the town has already made in some of these facilities, if we're not careful, if they're left unmanaged or unsupervised, and I'm not saying that they're not that now, because I think both those organizations have done a phenomenal job in keeping up and so forth. I think that we need to think bigger as a community as to how we want to be 5, 10, 20 years from now. I don't think the current role or the current model of the way that we're going about these things is going to be sustainable.
So, just so I understand the flow, if I will. So let's just take, I guess let's use Church Street for an example. So we know that the the major user of Church Street is the Little League.
Yep.
So the Little League, but we know it's used by, it can be used for tournaments,
Sure.
AAU,
Yep.
other than our own.
So currently
So
what's
they
happening
manage that?
is they're managing that, and then they're tasked with collecting the user fees and so forth, and then a percentage of that goes through the recreation department. So they collect 90%, they keep 90%, 10% is supposed to go to the recreation department, supposed to. So similar instance to down at Belmont Street with the soccer.
Okay. So, I'm gonna ask the hard questions here. So we're basically, and I don't wanna say blind, but we're letting these organizations kind of manage.
There's no checks and
There's
balances.
not a lot of checks and balances I'm feeling, but I'm feeling a lot, just based on our conversations with DPW, we do a tremendous amount of maintenance. We're putting on a tremendous amount of expense there, and we're not necessarily recovering that through the revenues.
So there was an agreement that was put forth a while ago that I believe both youth soccer and baseball annually pay the DPW an amount
Yeah.
for obviously upkeep,
Maintenance.
maintenance of the
Yeah.
fields and so forth.
Okay. That probably hasn't been looked at in a while, though.
No.
Okay.
So.
So I think, in your thought, and I think you've expressed it very well, that there probably, it needs to be more of a cohesive unit that then ties in closely with DPW, with schools, with fill in the
Yeah.
blank. Because we
All
have,
of the
we
town
have,
faci-
we have
all of the
some
town facilities.
facilities in
Yeah.
Bryan. And I think we had a similar conversation when we talked about, like, because the schools have similar scenarios too, where they're, you know, let's use this baseball field right out here, that they could have AAU in. So we've got just kind of a lot of disjointedness, I guess. is a
Checks
good-
flying around?
Yeah.
And
I
I
think-
agree with you that I think that there's real opportunity to be able to generate some revenue from existing town facilities that could go to, obviously, into a whole bunch of different fields. Town enrichment is obviously something that is,
Yeah.
you know, something that I'm concerned about. If we don't have a community, then what do we really have? So I think, you know, to hear the lady before me speak on what are our, you know, what are we doing for the town anniversary? Chances are nothing unless somebody
Somebody steps up,
steps
right?
up to the plate and there's some funding mechanisms available to it. So
Right, exactly.
that's the hard answer, and it's gonna continue to be the hard answer until we get some momentum and some energy and a collection of people that are like-minded and focused on what we agree to.
And we've seen tremendous, in the last 5 to 7 years, I personally have seen it, I think you guys, kids in the fields, I mean, our DPW has done a phenomenal job.
There's no question. I mean, as somebody who has an involvement in youth baseball around in South Shore, I would tell you that, you know, the fields here are absolutely
Top-notch.
A1, for sure.
Yeah,
For sure.
and to your point, we could, you know, I don't want to say capitalize on that, but we could.
Well, we
could
should.
really- We should be,
That's
we
what
should as a
be,
town
yeah.
be, we're part of
Certainly
that.
an
We should-
opportunity to be
yeah.
a host and to make some revenue.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
through that.
Going back to the organization that you pointed out, I mean, like, I could see a scenario where, like, your commission, you'd have, like, Schrader from Little League, Misha from soccer, and there would always be a seat for those reps on your commission, then you would kind of tie it together, right?
I would love to have them, add a seat at the table.
Well, it almost should be mandatory, because they got this money going on,
It
and
should,
Yeah.
if you want to speak for all that,
should
that
be
would,
mandatory.
that would tie it
So-
together, right?
There's some opportunity, some great.
Yeah, and I mean, we're just talking about field usage and so forth, and I think that recreation should be so much more than that. But
Community
before we
center,
get
whole
anywhere else,
space.
we've got to,
Crawl before we walk.
yeah, and I am a big fan of crawl before we walk, before we run. And recreation has been in the crib far too long, and it needs to stretch its legs.
So here's a scenario, like, say I wanted to rent the Belmont Fields and have Aerosmith come play in August. Who would I talk to about getting the field?
Good question. So you should be coming
So
to.
let's start the rumor now. Aerosmith.
Yeah, right, there you go.
Tickets will be
They're
on
not
sale.
that far away. They live in like Marshfield. And,
Yeah.
I mean, it's really
they're
doable.
Cohasset people. They're
They're out in
local.
Las Vegas now, but.
So as the
you
chair,
know,
you're saying you're bringing Aerosmith to town. is
I think they lost my number, but.
Oh, Lawrence Welk, whenever Lawrence
So
Welk comes.
it should come to the Recreation Commission first, and then what we should do is we should have a discussion with the other organizations that use that field. In this case, it would most likely be youth soccer, and make sure that any of the concerns that they would have, we would be addressing, you know, obviously. So that's the way that it should work.
Is that-
And
Right, but is that like a legal thing? Like, say I did that, and then you goes, we're not doing that. Like, and then I said, well, no, I want to do that, right? And, you know, it's like, is it codified anywhere?
Well,
about
I
this?
think to your point, what you're trying to say is the lines are fuzzy. The lines are fuzzy, because if you ask the average layperson who owns the Belmont Street fields, 9 out of 10 people are probably gonna say youth soccer owns them.
And they don't, the town does, correct?
Well, isn't there there's
know.
a form for permission to use town
So
property?
we do have on our website that we should definitely enhance. There are field usage forms and so forth. Now, that
But
being said,
that's-
you can fill out the form. It doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to say you have the right to, you know,
And
have
right
a.
now,
have
it
a-
goes to the Board of Selectmen for approval, isn't that how that's?
So it depends, I think, on, so like the town common, a lot of times they just go straight to the selectmen and so forth. I think what the best probable way for it to happen is it goes before the Recreation Commission, and then the Recreation Commission makes
a
a
recommendation.
recommendation
Yeah.
to do so or to not, and then allows, you know, the selectmen to say yes or no, if there are any people that are against.
So it's ultimately the selectmen that would make the decision?
I think they would be the last,
Yeah.
they would be the last. So if we denied somebody a field usage and somebody wanted to say we don't agree with Recreation Commission, then obviously that's where the selectmen would ultimately say, okay, let's figure out this grievance.
Right. So I mean, if we want to get more money out of these fields, we got to have a good process to let people know that, yeah, you know, they're
I
open for
think that's
business and.
part of tying everything together to what,
you're-
to what,
You guys could maybe do that.
Saying.
And then I would,
Process.
and then I would say, I think that what we should probably do is take a look at other like communities around us and see how they're organized. And I can tell you, because I have friends in the other towns. One happens to be on a recreation commission on a town in central Mass. And they're pretty much just a governing body, and they have a director who's the one who is charged with all of the things that we're talking about, making sure the business administration side of things is in line.
Yeah.
And then the Recreation Commission kind of sits back and chooses, you know, certain things that, everything comes before them, but then they're,
Yeah,
you
more of an
know,
executive.
exactly.
So is there anyone on the town payroll that's in recreation business, recreation department or something? Nothing?
Not that I'm aware of.
no.
Because I know one pet peeve I have is like the scheduling, right? The soccer's going on, the baseball's going on in the springtime, and then the football's going on, and it doesn't seem like the people who run the leagues aren't really talking to each other about, hey, we got this game going on, and then the kids try to play multiple sports, and they're all over, the parents are going crazy.
Pretty much the reason why I think, in my statement earlier on about kind of volunteerism and kind of going forward and so forth, I think if it's brought in under one umbrella, I think you'll see a lot of that be addressed for the
Get the
better.
communication going and moderate it, yeah, that makes sense.
Can you tell us, like, if you had to pick, like, the top 5 things that the rec commission does that, other than, like, the kind of the fields and that type of thing, what have you guys been working on in the last 2 years, let's just say? Have you been able to with $500?
Yeah, well, that's the other thing.
Yeah.
So obviously, Christmas Parade is under us. Although they're an organization, I don't know how they do it, especially given one of the biggest champions recently passed, and now that's kind of turning over. So that would be one. There was the Friends of the Trail is under us. One of the other organizations that ultimately was trying to get was under us, but then it made sense for them to go elsewhere was Skate and Recreation, like
E-base.
Oh, EB base, yep.
Yep. Concerts on the Common has fallen under us. And there's other things that we're looking to do as a commission that I don't think we're ready to kind of talk about because it's still in its early stages on ways to which we can kind of, again, enrich the community in which we live.
And you guys just do the Easter egg hunt, right?
We did the, yeah. I've bared the cold out at the Easter egg hunt, and
So even though they might be not ready for prime time, so the committee would probably be, like, what types of things are you looking to do in the future? Right? How are we looking to
how are we looking to
grow it?
to
and
grow it?
The vision.
Sure.
And I ask this only because I have this memory as a child, and I'm gonna put you on the spot and see if you remember too.
Okay.
I believe back in the day, and I could be going back like a really long time, we had an active rec commission program in the summer. I, as a child, remember going to the program here.
So,
Like the rec, yeah.
I would say that those are the things that we need to be looking towards.
Yeah.
Absorbing the
Summer
right-
enrichment, you know, before care, after care, you know, some of the arts things. In talking with a town member just the other day, he was telling me how he has one kid, he has 4 children. One of them goes to Pembroke for a flag football program and goes to Whitman Hanson during the summertime for some other club-type programs. And
Well,
that,
driving.
well, not only long drive, but that should be a red flag for us as, you know,
What are our kids
Community
doing in the
members, what-
summer?
Yeah, that's
Right.
what-
what are-
yeah,
lot of
not only
opportunities
what
and
are our
stuff like
kids
that.
doing, but why are the other towns how are the other towns having those things?
Well, so I think some of that stuff
Available.
happened, do you guys talk to the people over at the Y? Because I know they run some of that stuff.
They
and I
do
don't
run
know
a lot of that
if there's
stuff.
any
We really,
coordinations with
there
them
should be
people.
some synergies, you would think, between the Y and us. We really haven't had many
Private
discussions,
entity
but that's where a
versus, yeah.
private and public.
But to your point, you know, bringing everybody together. So we have some quasi little programs that, like, we have, you know, not that they're quasi, but we have like the Little Vikings program.
Sure.
So are you looking to create some synergies between some other
I think
programs within
that,
town?
again, just like I'm here today, and
Starting the process.
would love to sit down with the school and discuss opportunities where we would be able to do, help and share the responsibility of those types of programs.
What do you need to do it?
I think more of this, to be honest with you, just more of the committees and the boards getting together and seeing what we can do. Funds are obviously a big thing that we would be looking to do. Funds are coming in and coming out of our revolving account, and I don't think we've ever come close to the $40,000, but hopefully, with the revolving fund, if we could get that increased, and if we could get a legitimate stake in the fiscal side of things in the town, then I think that those would be 2 things that we would, that is the one side of it, and then the second side of it is really kind of tying all of those other things together. And, I mean, the Christmas parade alone is, you know, and we don't fund that. We supply, we do give money out of the recreation funds to that, but largely that's
Volunteers.
volunteered and paid for out of their own doings. I would love to be able to, as a recreation department commission, sit back and say, we're gonna, you know, allot you X number of funds so that you can keep the parade going and so forth. And, so I think that that's, you know, that's where we're at.
Do you know roughly what your revolving account hovers at? Is it,
It hovers around $15,000, but a lot of that has to do with the, what comes in through Strongsfield.
Yep.
And then what goes back out to Strongsfield, because outside of that, we'd be fortunate to have another $500 to $1,000 come in through the commission. So,
Okay.
tough to do anything on that.
So you're funding the Christmas parade?
We don't fund the
No.
Christmas parade, no.
they fund it through sponsorships?
And then,
Okay.
yeah, they fund it through that, and then, the past several years, we've paid for certain things that they've been unable to cover.
Because there's a line item in the budget for the Christmas parade.
The line item in the budget for the Christmas parade might be for the police detail.
Okay.
I'm guessing that might be for about $4,000 to $5,000, if I'm not mistaken. That covers strictly the police detail.
Okay.
Which that probably doesn't even cover it, because they're all out.
I don't know,
Any other questions for Mr.
Police.
Furia?
they're already on duty, aren't they?
I think, two really great, compelling groups talking to us tonight,
Yeah, definitely.
And again, we always hear, we hear the big groups and we hear the big departments, but I think it's important to see, similar to the Arts Council, what's, the good they're doing in town too, so. Great. All right, well, thank you very much. We'll take everything into consideration when we work on our budget.
Sounds good.
Excellent.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, BJ.
Have a good night.
Thank
you.
That's a whole nother discussion in terms of just the overall, recreation department in the community and stuff like that. To bring it all.
In a town of this size, one would think that we would be fighting over the salary of the rec director.
Exactly, yep.
No, there is none, right?
Right.
So maybe this is the first start, get them a full-time and a.
And then, as a finance person at heart, you can see me doing the cringe, I worry a little bit about the checks and balances and,
Right.
and,
Oh, yeah.
and the
Sure.
overall, are we keeping up with things and are we?
I don't know what they charge, but as I said before, I think that they do a fantastic job in maintaining these things, summer, spring, whatever. They're some of the best maintained facilities that I see
Are
around.
we keeping up with our
Yeah,
agreements?
exactly,
Yeah.
and are we being compensated appropriately? I know they're running tournaments throughout the summer here on both fields, here in Strongs and baseball-wise.
Be good to look at a ledger, hey, what happened last summer with the fields and stuff.
And how
Maybe
often
that.
should those agreements be looked at? When
Sure.
was the last time they were
Yeah, absolutely.
executed and updated?
Absolutely.
And are they keeping up with?
Like you said, they're all
Good times.
volunteers, so maybe if you put in for like a clerk type of person or admin, that's what's the other one, the Conservation Commission they have that woman who's gonna make sure everything's flowing and, she's keeping score and all that. I don't think they have that for recreation right now.
Soccer, he's not on ice this year.
Yeah, well, and that's a good point, we look, Krista brought up a good point, these organizations that are utilizing, their fees have an escalation path. I'm not sure, it doesn't sound like the agreement's been looked at in a long time, and I doubt that the agreement has a built-in escalation path in it.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's something we can, well, it's not for us to do necessarily, but it sounds
Make
like
some
the rec commission
recommendations.
is heading in the right direction.
Well, any agreement the rec commission would sign would have to be on file in the town clerk's office. So let's ask the town clerk what's on file.
For what, I'm sorry?
Any
Anything that the
agreement
rec
rec
Any
commission
agreements,
signs.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's ask the town clerk for what's on file.
I have time next week.
There you go.
Yeah.
I
Good
guess we're
idea.
not gonna find much. Maybe.
Yeah, it might not, it's like from 1965.
Yeah, it could be.
Okay.
But certainly another worthy cause.
So, so Kevin had asked the question, at what point do we start making some decisions? I think, so what we're actually gonna do next is we're gonna go through, a couple things. Brian's got some updated numbers, and packet for everybody. We're not necessarily gonna run through super detail. It's for us to kinda like look through. We're gonna take a quick run through the cherry sheet. We have an estimate of where we are with preliminary numbers, so we know kind of what we're dealing with as a starting point, which, is where we always start with the starting point, It's
Yep.
not in the right direction.
Start somewhere.
You gotta start somewhere. So I think, let's pass these out.
Any news on the schools
Yep.
negotiations?
Oh, the negotiations, I have no comment on that. But the school's budget has been
Progressing?
certified at 2.99. So
Okay, that's good, right?
Yep.
So that was the target that you
That was the
put out
target.
there?
Do you wanna do cherry sheet first, or do you wanna
Sure,
run
you
through?
can do cherry
Yeah,
sheet
let's do-
first. So the cherry sheet that I gave you is one the Department of Revenue puts together that tracks the proposal through. The cherry sheet estimate that's put together by the Department of Local Services, then there's the governor's proposal, then there'll be a House proposal, a Senate proposal, and of course, the conference committee agreement, which will be the actual bill they send back to the governor. Right now, I'm using the governor's budget estimates, primarily because I do believe that the school number will be more closer to the governor's number, even, and the other ones, if you notice, didn't change all that dramatically. So, and the veterans number is based on actual numbers, so I think we're still conservative, but, you know, I think it's sort of safe at this point to look at the governor's number. We may come back and amend that before we seal the budget. The sheet on the front page, this is, cherry sheets used to come literally on a piece of cherry paper. And on the front side of the cherry paper was the estimated receipts, and on the back of the cherry sheets were the charges. So if you will, the government give it,
Take
and the
back.
government take it back. So the second page here is the charges that get hit against the cherry sheet. So you can see that the charges against the cherry sheet total $774,000. And then you have to back out the library aid, and there's a school line that we have to back out as well, because that's an additional, you know, earmark, if you will. So we can't count on that. So you take the 13,442 and you minus the 774 and those two other numbers, and you come back with the number that I forecasted for our revenue.
Great. And this stuff is all mandatory, like the mosquito control? You can't
Oh,
get-
absolutely.
Can't get out of that, huh?
Well, I mean, the way it's so mandatory, they don't give it to you. So in other words, they're telling you what we're gonna give you, and then
Yeah.
before you get the check, they've deducted
Tell
these
you what, right,
charges.
This is
Yes.
your overhead or something. RMV non-renewal surcharge. That was an interesting one. All right, so it looks like we get back, if the governor
Right,
Well,
prevails, 12.5.
MBTA is
Now,
just
you- What's that?
MBTA is
It's 50
just a,
grand.
That's what the benefit to our community is judged at. If we had tracks, and that literally a station in the town, it would be higher than that.
Be a lot.
yeah,
Do people in East Bridgewater ride the train?
Yep, that's what that's.
okay,
Okay.
presumably. So they have to go to Whitman or someplace else to get it.
Bridgewater or-
but,
or-
You have to
so-
go to any town around us and get the train, but that's why it's only 52,000.
Okay.
If you had a station, you'd get a,
500,000,
yeah,
something like
you'd
that.
get a much bigger charge.
Interesting.
I prefer to actually have the station, but I'm not quite sure where I put it, so I don't wanna be really unpopular.
Well, the tracks are the tracks.
But, I mean, that's actually, in all sincerity, not an unreasonable number, considering that some of our neighbors pay.
Revenue, so this should,
So do you wanna attend off the next page, because then it will tie in?
Yep.
so,
So now if you go to your summary page. on
So if you
top.
go to the summary page, okay, you'll see the net state aid number, 12,370,654. You'll see the property tax and how we calculate the levy. So the maximum allowable levy, 32,263,075. Then you add the state aid, then the local receipts, free cash, and then, of course, the other available funds. So we come down to 55 million. On the other side, we have the expenses, so there's the budgets that have been proposed. And these are all proposed. The water budget appropriation, solid waste appropriation, is those are enterprise funds. And then the reserve for articles, which if you notice conveniently matches the free cash. And then the overlay exemption, 600,000. So we have $56 million in expenses. So the nice part is we're only off $500,000.
What else did you say, when you were saying, so the estimate on the cherry sheet, you have this number minus this number, and what else do you subtract?
There are two other numbers, the library aid number,
Okay.
okay?
Those are on just something different you have.
Yeah, I keep track of it in a different way. The library aid number and
School choice tuition.
school choice,
Yeah.
thank you.
So it's separate than the school choice number?
Nope, it's
Um,
these two right here, so it's offset receipts.
Like if I, just because if I take the total receipts and subtract the estimated charges out
Yep,
of
and then you have
it,
to back these two numbers out on the front, the library number and the school choice tuition number.
what about the snow and ice? We were talking about that last week, right?
Snow and
This is
ice.
zero?
Yeah, well, right now, that would be snow and ice deficit, so that would be this year's. We haven't obviously got it
Yeah,
yet.
okay,
Okay, so that's a number that's gonna have to come in.
okay, gotcha.
And,
That's been an easy winter, right?
yeah, but we blew the
Yeah.
budget already.
We blew the budget in that first storm.
So is
Good
the,
budget.
A little budget.
the increase in the snow and ice, is that in this reserve for articles number?
No,
Sorry.
so that's gonna go into, that's gonna go into the operating budget. So we're gonna
So that's,
increase the.
is
So
that
that
in
is
here
a-
right now?
is-
Okay.
Not
it's
yet.
not, right?
Snow and ice is gonna be difficult. Follow along and get lost with me, okay? We have a budget for snow and ice in the operating budget. It's inadequate, and it's a fallacy.
So that's what's.
Every
back-
year, you're allowed to deficit spend the snow and ice.
Right.
And we have made it up on the recap sheet every year, which reduces the amount of revenue that comes into the town for the operating fund. Or you can wait and, or not wait, but every spring at the springtime meeting, you can appropriate some of your free cash and pay off your deficit ahead of time. Or you can actually budget in your operating budget a real number and not have that problem at all. But that would make that deficit much bigger.
Okay, so we didn't factor in
We
the
did
number
not
we
yet.
talked about.
We have not
We have not
factored that
fixed
into
that
operating
problem.
yet. And we also do not have the deficit for
Right.
this current year
Right.
included in that too. So
So
we
there's-
will end up with a deficit number on the total, and we are going to increase the operating budget.
So the reserve for articles, what does that represent?
That will be the articles that we put forward at town meeting that use non-recurring funds of revenue
Okay, so
outside of
these
the
are
operating
all
cash.
already articles that are written that we,
We have
Not
not
yet.
seen them and voted on them yet.
so where's it, is that number from actual articles though?
No, that number is from your free cash availability. Free cash being non-recurring.
So if our reserve for articles came in at 2 million, then we'd have free cash available to fund snow and ice.
Yes,
Yep.
So a lot of this could change just based
Yes,
on what
this
our
is- this is
articles-
very
the only thing
preliminary.
that's not going to
Yeah.
change is the operating deficit. Because if you think about it, and this is, we're gonna have lots of discussions about this, and I'm going to definitely double
So you
talk.
shouldn't fund your operating budget from free cash.
Triple talk.
So, yes, I don't wish to commit the use of one-time revenue sources to ongoing
Right.
expenses. So that's why I get very weird about spending free cash. If we can do, there's a couple things that we wanna remember. We have about $1 million, well, actually, in the budget proposals right now, I have over $1.3 million of capital requests, and we've only allocated right now $1 million. So the capital budget committee has work to do. In addition, we have to fund the snow and ice deficit, and that's from that article. And we have a debt that's still on the outstanding with a bond anticipation note from last year at about $970,000. So if I could wipe that out as opposed to borrow, we're authorized to borrow for it, and we could. But if I could wipe that before it goes out to permanent debt, I would like to do that. So I have lots of calls on that $3 million. So
Yeah.
we may not have enough of, we may have to let that bond go forward, but let's see. It depends upon how the capital budget committee, comes in and what other articles we have to fund in town meeting. The article deadline is the end of the month, and then I'll put together, as I did with the capital budget, here's the requests. That doesn't necessarily mean that the selectmen have to accept the article. It just means it's a proposal. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Okay.
seems to.
And I think we're thinking, next week, we have the school budget. I don't think we're gonna do anything else that night. I think we'll just dedicate that night. But I think the next week, we'll be in a good place, to have obviously an update on this, but I think we can start running through articles at that point too. Because we're gonna,
I have 32 articles already.
we need to get going on the articles.
That's a lot.
Yeah,
I'm expecting 50.
50 articles.
yeah, so,
That
Those are
doesn't mean
from
they'll
all
all
the
make it.
departments.
Yeah, that doesn't mean they'll all survive,
You
but
reckon
Right.
sell like coffee at the meeting, the town meeting? We'll sell
Are
some
the,
coffee and.
by tradition, is it only the articles that have a financial component that come here, or does this?
this committee has the legal authority to look at any article.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Usually, you,
Historically,
historically,
we've
you
only
only,
done
only
money articles.
opine on money.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you see something that you think, while it doesn't have a price tag today, could have a price tag tomorrow, you have the right to comment on it. There's no restriction. From the finance committee, can opine on any article in the warrant. But traditionally, you've confined yourself to money.
Just because my brain's going backwards a little too, back to the two presentations we saw tonight. So I think before we kind of make some final determinations, I'd like to just maybe do a little bit more digging on, like, the revolving fund. I'd like to just see some detail that I can share with you guys on the revolving fund for the rec commission. One of the other items, which I didn't bring up with Mrs. Nelson, but there might be, I think there is some, we think she maybe referred to it as private funds, but there's some trust money that was left to the historic commission, which maybe had been forgotten about.
And she was in my office today, and I brought that forward to her. She didn't know.
Yeah.
So there's 26,000.
24, I think,
20,
24.
yeah.
24,000.
Isn't there like a tree department here? I thought I saw.
There is a tree
For
department.
a general purpose or limited purpose? Or
The graveyard, specifically the graveyard. So,
So,
one of the questions you really want to perhaps go back with is, I don't see there's really a problem changing their operational funds to 2,500, but if the project they want to do is the graveyard, there is a fund of money. Do they have another project that they want to do that, that you want to put $2,500 to? It's a small committee. I'm sure they'd love help, so if we're on TV, I'm sure they'd love some assistance.
yes.
And there is a bicentennial coming in 3 years, so there's gonna have to be a real hard look at the activity of the commission, because while they may not necessarily be in charge, they're gonna certainly play a role.
And it kind of brought up the question that I feel like a little bit of a broken record when we talk about these departments, commissions, groups, committees, or line items in the budget. How can we get the full look at a picture, as opposed to just a portion of it, which is just that operating expense line item, when we need to have an understanding of what their revenue sources are as well, right? We need to truly understand.
Yeah, where's that?
Yeah. So, well, I think it's something we all need to evolve to.
Are these the only revenues here
These are the only revenues that
that you know about?
I know about. I mean, every once in a while, I discover a new one, because, the financial statement will come, it'll list everything. So we'll dig that out, we'll spend some time
Yep.
on the financial statement, that's due shortly.
Yeah. But similar, we asked the same question, like, of the library. The library, asked, and I'm just using them as an example, but it
Yeah,
could
right.
be fire department, it could be police department, it could be anything. They ask for their line items, but we're not seeing X,
Yeah,
Y, and
right.
Z on this other side of what's coming in and what are they spending out of it, right? And I think it does play into the big picture.
Totally.
Yeah.
I would agree with that 1,000%.
And the
But I
department
don't
heads-
think it's,
The department heads aren't trying to pull
No,
anything. This is
no,
what
no,
they've-
no, no.
they've had. But, I mean, there are
kind of the way it's
grant
always
monies
been.
available to the Council on Aging, there's grant money
Right.
available for the library funds.
Yep.
There's a revolving fund for the library. The police department has the seizure account. These are things that,
Right.
you can't take some of that money and run your department with it.
Right.
But
You
it's
pay some of the
available.
general expenses, things like that?
You have to do
Certain
something
things.
special
Certain-
to it,
Those
let's take,
riders
for
on it.
example, the seizure account, you have to do something that reduces crime. You can't
Yeah.
just say, I wanna buy another police officer,
Right.
so.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't this lady talk to the tree department about getting the trees fixed? I don't
Well, that's John
understand.
Haynes.
That's John
That
Haynes.
is John,
She
she
is.
has,
Director of-
but it has to be outsourced. It's not something they can do.
Yeah.
So it has to
Well,
be.
you
You've got a
Right.
budget here, right? So
Got 26 grand.
So if we had the CPA,
you get duty.
funds could be used from the CPA to go towards that. Is it possible to bring the CPA up again
Is it up?
this
When-
year?
I think that would have to be, I think that's a discussion with the Board of Selectmen.
Okay.
It's above my pay grade, because you're now gonna put a ballot question out. But I can tell you that this year, we would have just gotten a payment for $56,000.
And we paid into it anyways.
Oh, that's how much money was paid in from the town of East Bridgewater in fees at the registry that would have come back to the town in a CPA,
But we're not getting
plus
the
the
56,000.
match that you would get. So
Just
if if they matched it at 100%, which they're not,
Right.
okay, you'd get double what you paid. They're matching they matched last year at 17%, which is the lowest they'd ever done. So the governor put more money in it, so it's gonna come in at a match somewhere between 34 and 40%. but it's still pretty good.
Yeah.
What's
Oh, I
the
You know,
history?
Free money kind of thing.
The best way to describe the CPA is it's an end run around Proposition 2.5. It creates a voluntary surcharge on every tax bill. There are safety valves. The first $100,000 of value is exempted. In certain incomes are exempted. So there's ways to level the playing field a little bit without hurting people. That extra percent can be anywhere from 1.5% to 3%, depending upon what the town would decide to do. But some of the misnomers of CPA is they don't tell you what color you can paint your house, okay?
I heard a lot about, the town was gonna take your property.
Town cannot take your property for historic
What is our
purposes.
history, because I know it came up.
It was last, in 2016. It
16?
was voted down by the town of East Bridgewater.
I mean,
I
the
don't think
argument
enough
against it,
information went out.
the two arguments for it and against it, the against it is a tax,
It was a tax.
okay? And it is an end run around 2.5. And the other debate is, well, how do we spend the money? But town money, that money is appropriated by town meeting. So if you don't like the project, that means you didn't go to town meeting. So, you know, town meeting decides how that appropriation goes. If they wanna, you know, put up a town clock and you don't agree, town meeting's the place to disagree.
If you don't vote, you can't complain.
Correct. One of the neat things about CPA is it can do affordable housing, it can do historic preservation, it can do
Parks.
recreation,
Space.
open space acquisition. So, for example, we have some rather large tracts of land that are open space that might appear on the market. The town has no ability to pay for those, so, or to buy them. But if you had the CPA,
That
you
would be good,
theoretically
right.
have the opportunity.
Yep.
That's the advantage to the CPA. Disadvantage is, it's a tax.
Right. Care what you pay for.
Mhm.
Be a good question for a new,
It'll be a good
a
question.
good candidates night question.
That is a good candidate's night question.
But I read the stuff that came through on mostly social media about
In 2016,
a lot of inaccuracies there.
the hits that the CPA took, yep.
Yeah.
I know, it was painful, broke my
Yeah,
heart.
and unfortunately, I don't have a problem with having the argument based on true facts,
Thank you.
Yeah.
you know.
It should be.
Yes.
And then you get
There
down
was
to
like
the
a scare, yeah, it was a
philosophical.
fear, there was fear that was kind of, yeah, it's fear-based.
Fear of Big Brother.
Always watching.
But there's some neat things that have been done in other communities,
Oh, yeah, I've
preservation
seen
and historic
Carver,
resources.
Clemson.
They've even taken some, you know, like churches with great stained glass windows and preserved the stained glass window. You know, it's not separation of church and state, it's protecting historic assets. So there has been some tremendous benefit to the community in keeping your assets, what makes you a community.
So, we'll get our final, bless you. Bless you, Jen.
Two for a buck.
We'll have our final budget in next week. So that we'll be able to, you know, we know what it is, obviously, it's been certified, but we'll get the detail hopefully behind it and we can plug that in. I know I asked, and forgive me, but I can't, I think Dan, so we had asked for some, the liaisons for DPW and.
Yep, he sent the email
fire.
out, and I was actually gonna ask if they were, I didn't get a reply back, so I don't know if he got the budget.
Oh, Dan sent it out?
Yep.
Okay.
Dan sent it out.
So that was good out, and then fire, is that Dan?
Fire.
Is
Yeah.
Dan fire too?
That was Dave. Dave and I.
Oh,
did the
Dave and
fire.
you,
Yeah.
okay.
The chief.
Yeah,
Hard.
so I think we need to probably do a little,
Is it?
yeah, probably have a visit and talk about
Yeah, it's a lot of them.
scaling
it's
back a
just
little bit.
Double-digit increases. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't afford that. I don't know why people would think that they can.
Yeah. So maybe we can maybe do an email and talk strategy a little bit about going back, but I think we need to go back and get maybe a little bit more realistic
Right.
numbers to look at.
So should we go like department by department and just say, like, I was just looking on the ones that are below 5%, good, the ones that are above need extra looking at, type of thing?
Well, we can certainly start, so we know right off the bat, well, we knew, just based on our conversation with John, we knew we had some some things to go back and look at and tighten up a little bit, so we know that right off the bat. I think we all kind of agreed that, you know, fire came in probably a little high.
Yes, this is
And
no
then-
fires.
And so, yeah, so,
There you go.
yeah, there you go.
This is sorted, which one's a sort? 5%, no,
It's-
not
You're-
5%.
and you're gonna
This is
get-
by the order of the budget.
Right,
Brian's
so-
gonna send me these documents electronically, so I'll be able
My
to give
thinking
you
was
these.
like, if you sorted it and said, okay, all these, like, school's 2.99, yeah, that's good, we don't, you know,
So,
some of them are 10.
yeah, I mean,
Right.
Some of them are
Let's look at those.
teeny tiny numbers with high percentages.
2.99, when you're at that.
Yeah,
Red flag.
that's above the threshold, I think,
So
right?
Brian's gonna give me these documents electronically, and I'll send them out to everybody, so that's just a quick summary by department too.
Bring 'em home to my lunch, yeah.
And I think once we get past next week with school, then we can really start to kind of dig in a little bit. Hopefully, we'll hear back, with that, we'll hear back from fire. And then if there's any other line items, please feel free. If there's any other line items you think we need to kind of take another look at, Brian and I definitely have some other updates we need to kind of go back and look at, and plug in, and then assess the numbers where we are again. But please feel free, email me if there's something specific that you have a question on, or we want to send an email out and question back. We then need to take into consideration the two requests we had tonight, and think about how we want to address those. I think we've got a little bit new information on the Historic Commission with that grant.
I mean, there was something tangible there, dollars and cents wise, I mean, Recreation Commission, I mean,
Yeah, you need to get they have a plan, and I think also they should have some kind of public, you know, they should, like, a lot of people do like the matching. So if they came back and said, hey, I got some sponsorship for 20 grand, can you give me 20 grand? That would resonate with me more than just, hi, we want to do some stuff and give us some money.
Mhm.
You know, like, I don't know, what are you gonna do with it, right?
Well, I think their thought is they would love to ultimately do a summer rec program, whether or not that can happen this year
Hey, map
versus
it out,
next
just-
year.
yeah, I mean, so who's gonna be in charge of it?
Yeah.
Right.
B, how much it's gonna cost,
Yeah,
then
It's like
you
when
got
you go
something
to,
to talk about.
Yeah.
when you go to the bank, you have to bring a business plan before you get the
Yep.
money, right? So I think that's,
So, I mean, it's great to have them here or
Maybe
whatever, but.
Should he be meeting with, like, who makes those changes to that commission?
they need to initiate them. I think they would probably need to initiate and come forth to the point.
So
of
maybe-
Yeah,
If they
like
want to do X, Y, and Z, if they want to do what's called a summer program, they need to come in with that business plan for a summer program. And is that doable in the time frame for this year? Maybe, maybe not.
right. They just got it going for next year then, right?
Yeah, yeah. But again, I think it's, you know,
Organizational changes need to happen within that commission itself, and then
yeah.
make the plan, and then they can come and.
Yeah, and maybe it's a gradual step process too. Maybe it's not, you know, and again, they didn't give us necessarily a dollar amount, but maybe it's a, you know, we have a little faith in you guys to.
550 this year.
Yeah.
Huh?
550 this year.
Yeah, well, you know, you joke, but maybe it's a little, we give you a little something to help get the ball rolling.
They need to have a plan,
Right,
right?
you
can't
gotta come
fund-
back with, right.
How do you fund, there's no plan to fund.
There's also, you know, when you have a plan, come and see us, we'll transfer some money.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
that's,
I mean,
that's
under
more
their
appropriate way
current
to do it.
setup,
Yep.
That's true, we do
they
have that
decide,
ability.
okay, we wanna hire a recreation director.
Yeah.
How does that,
And the
You
other-
put it into the,
Yeah,
that
that-
would require
that would
putting
be-
it into the proper budget. 'cause
but
you
they
have
would be the
fringe
ones to
benefits.
initiate.
They have to
hire
initiate.
that, is that right?
They're
The,
probably
the
calling
hiring
you.
could be delegated,
Yeah.
but we need to come up with a clear mission. If I want to hire, you know, you, Kevin, to do the job, I need to come with a job description and give you the authority. So there has to be some vetting here on, you know, what do you want that position to accomplish, and what authority are you investing?
Right.
So that you could do that, but I think the first step for recreation would be a business plan.
Yeah.
What do you
Yeah, I mean,
want to do?
longer term, I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's where it evolves to,
Yeah.
if you wanna have something
I
that
think it's-
really is gonna be community.
I mean, the other
give the
possibility
community the
is,
biggest bang for their
I could
buck.
find a grant that could write a recreation plan,
Okay.
okay, that, I
you
missed
go.
the,
Oh,
the
right.
DLTA deadline, but I could, you know, we could be on the lookout for a place to grab some money to, you know,
Right.
10 grand fund a study, what do you wanna be when you grow up?
Yeah, okay,
you
well,
know.
the Celtics is a billionaire, Kraft, you
Yeah,
can get
I
them.
mean, you definitely
Yeah.
want, I mean, there's plenty of templates to look at. Recreation departments run the gamut, but the most successful ones have big programs which are self-sufficient,
Yes.
Yeah,
you know, and I think with the size of our community and the assets we have, I think he could be,
Yeah, those fields are definitely utilized.
yeah.
And the revolving accounts aren't operational, so we wouldn't be able to see.
Yeah,
their-
we can,
Oh,
absolutely,
Okay.
yeah. Their revolving accounts are through the town. so
Yeah,
we have that
I've
detail.
already made a note to get a printout of the
I
general
asked for
ledger,
it, we just didn't get
so
it
you know what
tonight.
came in and what went out.
Yeah.
That'd be good.
But I think I'm thrilled to death that they've got, that active a group.
Yeah, I
Um,
heard they
Yeah,
put
and
the
I-
trailer.
It's an important thing.
The trailer?
Yeah, the little trailer that's out back, that they still use, they'll still use it for.
Oh,
like,
really?
Yeah, things on the common.
Oh,
Bring
oh,
it up
yeah,
to
yeah,
the-
yeah,
you
yeah,
know what
yeah,
I'm talking
the-
about.
yeah, okay, that one, yes. Yeah, that probably could use some,
They could
but I
use-
think they're on the right track. I think they're.
I think we need to support
you know,
volunteers.
Well, that's what I think.
Nobody there makes a
So,
paycheck.
right.
And they're
And if
asking
you've got a
us
group of
for
people that are
some
really-
help,
Yeah.
that's our job.
Yep. And I also like the thought process of, even if it doesn't, we have, as a committee, have the ability to transfer. So if something does come together.
Yeah, I mean, I'd
you
rather
know, at
look in
some
that
point.
direction than
Yeah.
sort of guess at what,
Yep.
well.
Oh, just throw a dollar,
Yeah.
yeah, then throw
Yeah.
money at it.
We have the
Have a
ability.
plan.
I mean, give them a little more than 500, but,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, what does it take? What is the,
Well,
what
show
does
me
it
a
need
plan.
to do it?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Maybe it needs
Show-
$1 million,
show us a plan At some
but
point this year, and you can,
it might be, if it's
certainly.
self-sufficient and, go
Yeah.
ahead,
I
do
don't
it.
think anybody sitting here is gonna say,
No.
recreation's
Yeah.
a bad thing. you know.
No. Absolutely.
No, I'll take my kids.
Okay, so I think that's all we had to cover. You didn't have anything, right? I owe you minutes, don't I? the meeting you
for
weren't
the
here.
Police and fire.
Yeah.
Oh, you're a trooper.
I have another set done, but I couldn't print them, so
Okay.
I'll bring them next time.
That's fine. We should be able to squeeze in some minutes afterwards, after the school. We
Yeah.
should probably squeeze them in.
I'll do, I need last week and this week, but I have another one, so.
Okay. Okay,
I'm not worried.
great. Any other outstanding questions or concerns about the process? No? We're good?
I
Excellent.
think so.
Make a motion to adjourn?
I'll second.
All right. Any discussion? All in favor?
I
Aye.
want to stay later.
The meeting
No
would never
offense,
end.
anybody.
Should stay in session until town meeting.
7:42.
Oh, 7.